November 14th, 1962. Ashao Valley, South Vietnam. The air smells of rotting vegetation and diesel fuel. Through the dense canopy of mahogany and teak, shafts of late afternoon sunlight cut through the humidity like blades. Somewhere in the undergrowth, a Viet Cong squad leader named Nguyen Van Than crouches beside a trail, his AK-47 resting across his knees. He's been fighting the French since he was 17, now 34. His face is weathered like old leather, his hands calloused from years of digging tunnels and hauling supplies down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The sound reaches him first, a distant whop, whop, whop that makes the younger fighters glance nervously at the sky. Than doesn't move. He's heard helicopters before. The French had a few. Slow, clumsy machines that could barely carry 4 men. Nothing to fear if you knew how to wait, how to aim. Truc Thang, one of the younger fighters whispers. Helicopter. Thang listens as the sound grows louder, more insistent. Through a gap in the canopy, he catches his first glimpse of the machine, a Bell UH-1 Iroquois, what the Americans are already calling a Huey after its original designation, HU-1. It's painted in olive drab, its bubble front cockpit glinting in the sun, its 48-foot rotor blades beating the air with that distinctive whoop, whoop, whoop that will soon become the signature sound of the Vietnam War. The Huey passes overhead at maybe 1,500 feet, moving at what Than estimates is barely 90 miles per hour. He can see the door gunners sitting in the open cabin, their M60 machine guns pointed uselessly at nothing. The helicopter banks slightly, exposing its thin aluminum skin, its vulnerable fuel tanks, the fragile tail boom that connects the rear rotor to the body. Than smiles. His teeth are stained from tobacco and betel nut. He turns to the younger fighters and says something that makes them laugh. A joke about shooting ducks, about how the Americans have brought them flying targets that move slower than the French helicopters, that hang in the air like paper lanterns waiting to be shot down. He doesn't know, cannot know, that he's looking at the machine that will rewrite the rules of warfare, that within 3 years these helicopters will be everywhere, that the Americans will build an entire doctrine of war around them, that the sound of rotor blades will become the sound of death arriving from any direction at any time. The Huey disappears over the tree line, its sound fading to a distant thump, thump, thump. Than returns his attention to the trail. The Americans are here with their advisors, their money, their weapons, but they're still just Americans, rich, soft, impatient. They'll leave, just like the French left. Wars in Vietnam are won on the ground, in the jungle, in the tunnels. Wars are won by men willing to endure, to outlast, to pay any price. 2 miles away, at a fire base carved out of the red clay earth, Captain James Hutchins of the 57th Medical Detachment climbs out of that same Huey. He's 27 years old, West Point class of 57, and he's just completed what the Army is calling a medical evacuation demonstration mission, flying to a simulated casualty site, loading a dummy onto a stretcher, and flying it back to a field hospital. The demonstration took 23 minutes from alarm to delivery. Under normal circumstances, with roads and weather cooperating, a medevac ambulance in this terrain would take 2 to 3 hours. Often longer. Often too late. Hutchins wipes the sweat from his forehead and looks at the Huey. Its turboshaft engine is still ticking as it cools. The Lycoming T-53 turbine gives this bird something the old piston-engine helicopters never had: power, reliability, and the ability to operate in heat and humidity that would kill a reciprocating engine. The Huey can carry 8 fully equipped troops or 6 stretchers. It can cruise at 120 miles per hour. It can reach anywhere in this valley in under 15 minutes. "Sir," his sergeant says, walking up with a clipboard, "Battalion wants to know if we're ready for real-world operations." Hutchins looks at the helicopter, then at the mountains surrounding the valley. Somewhere out there, the enemy is watching, waiting, assuming this is just another American toy that will break or leave or prove useless in the reality of jungle warfare. "Tell them yes," Hutchins says. "We're ready." He has no idea that within 5 years, Hueys will be conducting over 20,000 sorties per month, that they'll save tens of thousands of lives, that they'll terrify an enemy who thought they understood this war. March 23, 1963. Firebase Zulu, Quang Ngai Province. Private First Class Michael Cordero is 19 years old and dying. He knows this with the same certainty he knows his own name. The knowledge sits in his chest alongside the AK-47 round that punched through his abdomen 47 minutes ago during a patrol ambush 3 clicks west of the firebase. He's lying in red mud that's mixing with his blood, creating a soup of clay and viscera that his buddies are trying not to look at as they press field dressings against the entry and exit wounds. "Stay with us, Mikey," Corporal Thomas Wade keeps saying, his hands slick with blood. "Stay with us, man. Dust-off's coming. You hear that? Dust-off's coming." Cordero can hear it, that whop, whop, whop growing louder through the ringing in his ears. In World War II, the average time between wounding and surgical treatment was 10 to 12 hours. In Korea, it dropped to 4 to 6 hours. But the terrain here, the lack of roads, the constant ambushes, even 4 hours might as well be forever when you're bleeding out in a rice paddy. The Huey comes in fast and low, its rotor wash flattening the elephant grass in a perfect circle. The pilot is Warrant Officer Robert Mason, 22 years old, 6 months in country, and he's bringing the skids down while his door gunners scan the tree line with their M60s. The co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer 2, David Mitchell, is calling out altitudes 20 feet, 15, 10. They touch down 23 yards from Cordero's position. The crew chief, Specialist 4 Raymond Torres, jumps out before the skids fully settle, his medic bag already open. He's at Cordero's side in seconds, his hands moving with practiced efficiency, checking pulse, checking pupils, checking the field dressings that are already soaked through. "Abdominal GSW entry and exit," Wade shouts over the rotor noise. "He's been down 47 minutes. Pressure's dropping." Torres doesn't waste time on acknowledgement. "Get him on the bird, now." They lift Cordero as one unit, Wade, Torres, and 2 other soldiers whose names Cordero doesn't remember, or maybe never knew. The world tilts and spins. Pain explodes through his core like white phosphorus. He tries to scream, but nothing comes out except a wet, gurgling sound that terrifies him more than the pain. Inside the Huey's cabin, they strap him to a stretcher mounted on the bulkhead. Torres is already setting up an IV, finding a vein in Cordero's arm while Mason pulls pitch and the helicopter lifts off. Nose down, accelerating away from the landing zone before they're even 10 feet off the ground. "Contact left," the left door gunner, Specialist 4 James Wu, suddenly shouts. His M60 opens up with a sound like tearing canvas, spent brass casings cascading onto the cabin floor. Green tracers arc up from the tree line, passing so close to the cockpit that Mason can see them streaking past like angry fireflies. "Taking fire! Taking fire!" Mitchell calls over the radio. "Medevac 7-3 taking fire from the LZ!" But they're already moving, already accelerating to 120 knots, already putting distance between themselves and whoever decided a helicopter marked with red crosses made an acceptable target. The Huey wasn't designed to be a combat aircraft. Its aluminum skin can be penetrated by rifle fire. Its fuel tanks aren't self-sealing. A lucky shot to the tail rotor or the engine can turn it into a falling coffin. Yet Mason holds the course, keeps the power on, because there's a kid bleeding out behind him, and the 24th Evacuation Hospital at Chu Lai is exactly 8 minutes away at current speed. Torres works in the organized chaos of the cabin, one hand steadying himself against the bulkhead, while the other checks Cordero's vitals. The IV is running wide open, saline to replace volume, to buy time, to keep the heart pumping what little blood remains. Cordero's face is the color of old paper. His lips are blue. His breathing is shallow and rapid, the classic signs of hypovolemic shock. "Stay with me, Marine," Torres says. Though Cordero is Army, everyone becomes a Marine when they're dying. 8 minutes. You can do 8 minutes. Think about your girl. You got a girl? Cordero's lips move. Torres leans closer. "Sarah," Cordero whispers. "Her name is Sarah." "Okay, good. Tell me about Sarah. What's she look like?" But Cordero's eyes are rolling back, his body going slack against the restraints. Torres checks his pulse. Thready, weak, but still there. Still there. "How far?" Torres shouts toward the cockpit. 4 minutes, Mason calls back. 4 minutes. In World War II, Michael Cordero would be dead. In Korea, Michael Cordero would be dead. But this is Vietnam, 1963, and 4 minutes is the difference between a closed casket and an open one, between a telegram to Sarah that starts with, "We regret to inform you," and a letter that starts with, "I'm coming home." The Huey eats up the distance at 2 miles per minute, Below them, the green hell of jungle gives way to rice paddies, then to the sprawl of the firebase complex with its sandbag bunkers and its aid station marked with a giant red cross visible from the air. Mason brings the Huey into a combat landing, fast, nose high, flaring at the last second to bleed off speed, the skids touching down in a cloud of red dust. The aid station team is already running toward them with a gurney, their movements practiced from handling dozens of similar cases every week. Torres helps transfer Cordero from the helicopter stretcher to the gurney. A doctor, Captain Elizabeth Chen, one of the first female surgeons in a combat zone, is already doing her assessment while they wheel him toward the surgical tent. Penetrating abdominal trauma, entry and exit approximately 50 minutes since wounding, Torres rattles off. BP's in his boots. Pulse 120 and thready, one IV running wide open. Chen nods, her face grim but focused. Get him into OR2. Tell them we're doing an X lap now. They disappear into the tent. Mason watches them go, then keys his radio. Medevac 7-3 back on station, he reports. Ready for next mission. Because there will be a next mission. There's always a next mission. August 17, 1963. Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Headquarters, Saigon. General William Westmoreland stands before a map of South Vietnam that covers an entire wall of the briefing room. Red pins mark enemy activity, blue pins mark American and ARVN positions. The pattern is clear to anyone who knows how to read it. The enemy is everywhere and nowhere, appearing from the jungle to strike and then melting away before conventional forces can respond. Colonel Harold Moore sits in the front row, his notebook open, his mind racing through tactical possibilities. He's been watching the Huey operations for 6 months now, watching them evacuate wounded, watching them ferry supplies, watching them do things that textbooks said helicopters couldn't do. Moore is a student of military history, and he recognizes what he's seeing, not just a new weapon, but a new way of making war. Gentlemen, Westmoreland begins, his pointer tapping the map, we have an enemy who refuses to mass, who refuses to hold ground, who strikes and vanishes. Traditional infantry tactics are designed for an enemy who wants to hold territory. This enemy wants only to bleed us, to make this war too costly to continue. He moves the pointer to a valley in the Central Highlands. 2 weeks ago, an ARVN regiment walked into an ambush here, 6 hours to get reinforcements on the ground. By the time help arrived, the enemy was gone and we had 200 casualties. Westmoreland turns from the map. We cannot fight this war on foot. We cannot fight this war tied to roads that the enemy controls with mines and ambushes. We need to think differently. Moore knows what's coming. He's already been thinking differently for months. Air mobility, Westmoreland continues. The Huey has proven it can move troops faster than any ground transport. What if we built entire units around helicopter transport? What if we could put a battalion anywhere in South Vietnam within hours? What if we could respond to enemy movements with speed instead of mass? A major in the back raises his hand. Sir, helicopters are fragile. They're vulnerable to ground fire. We'd be sending men into landing zones in aircraft that can be shot down by rifle fire. They're already shooting at our medevac birds, Westmoreland replies. The enemy doesn't respect the Geneva Convention. Every Huey that goes up is taking fire, and you know what? We're getting them through. Last month, we flew over 40,000 sorties. We lost 8 helicopters. 8. And we evacuated 2,000 wounded men who would have died waiting for ground ambulances. Moore stands. Sir, if I may. Westmoreland nods. I've been developing a concept, Moore says, moving to the map. We take a full infantry battalion and make it air mobile. Not just capable of helicopter transport, designed for it. We train the men to fast rope, to rappel, to assault directly from hovering helicopters. We develop tactics for landing zone selection, suppressive fire, immediate dispersion upon landing. He traces a pattern on the map. The enemy operates from base camps in remote areas because they think distance protects them. What if distance becomes meaningless? What if we can hit their base camps, their supply depots, their training areas before they know we're coming? Logistics, the major says. You can't supply a battalion by helicopter. We can, Moore responds. A Huey can carry 4,000 pounds of cargo or 8 troops. We calculate the supply requirements, we establish forward arming and refueling points, we pre-position supplies. It's not impossible, it's just different. Westmoreland is nodding slowly. How many Hueys would you need? Moore has done the math. For a battalion-size operation, I'd need 60 helicopters minimum. 30 for initial assault, 15 for immediate reinforcement, 15 for supply and medevac. We'd conduct operations in waves. First wave secures the LZ, second wave brings the main force, third wave brings heavy weapons and supplies. That's a lot of helicopters, someone mutters. Bell is producing 700 Hueys this year, Moore counters. They're planning to double production next year. The machines are available. The question is whether we have the vision to use them properly. The room falls silent. What Moore is proposing isn't just tactical, it's revolutionary. For 10,000 years, warfare has been limited by how fast men can march, how far they can carry supplies, how quickly they can concentrate force. The Huey changes everything. Time and distance, the fundamental constraints of warfare become malleable. Westmoreland looks at the map for a long moment. Colonel Moore, you'll take command of the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment. You'll develop the air assault doctrine. You'll train the men. And when you're ready, you'll prove this concept works. Moore feels his pulse quicken. The 7th Cavalry, Custer's regiment, decimated at Little Bighorn by an enemy that refused to fight in the expected way. The historical irony isn't lost on him. Yes, sir, Moore says. 300 miles north, in a tunnel complex beneath the jungle floor, Colonel Nguyen Van Tan receives a report from his intelligence officer. The Americans are bringing in more helicopters, hundreds of them. They're building something called heliports near their major bases. They're training pilots by the dozens. Than studies the report by candlelight. He's been fighting Americans for a year now, and he's learned to respect their firepower, their equipment, their ability to call down artillery and airstrikes. But wars aren't won by equipment. Wars are won by will. Let them have their helicopters, Than says. They're loud, they're obvious, they're vulnerable. Every helicopter in the air is a target. Every landing zone is an opportunity for ambush. The Americans think technology will save them. We'll teach them that technology means nothing when you're fighting on our ground. By our rules. His intelligence officer nods, but something in his expression suggests doubt. Thang notices. You disagree? Sir, the helicopters, they're changing things. Our men used to have hours to prepare after we spotted American movements. Now the Americans can be anywhere in minutes. Yesterday, a helicopter landed supplies at a firebase we were planning to attack. The supplies included radar equipment we didn't know they had. The attack was called off. Than considers this. Then we adapt. We train for helicopter ambushes, we dig deeper tunnels, we move only at night when they can't fly. We set up AA positions around likely landing zones. The Americans may have helicopters, but we have patience, we have jungle, we have the support of the people. He doesn't say what he's thinking, that for the first time since the French left he's worried. The helicopters are different from other American weapons. Artillery can be avoided by staying mobile. Fighter bombers need clear weather and visible targets. But the helicopters come in any weather, land anywhere, strike without warning. The rules are changing. The question is whether North Vietnam can change fast enough to survive. April 2nd, 1964, Landing Zone X-Ray, Binh Dinh Province. Warrant Officer Carl Benson brings his Huey into a landing zone that doesn't exist yet. The clearing below is barely 60 meters across, ringed by jungle so thick you could hide a regiment in it. Which is exactly what intelligence thinks is down there. A regiment, maybe more, of North Vietnamese Army regulars who've been raiding ARVN outposts for the past 3 weeks. Benson is leading a flight of 8 Hueys, each carrying 8 men from the 1st Cavalry Division's newly formed Air Assault Battalion. Behind him, another 12 helicopters wait at altitude, ready to bring in the second wave. Above them all, a pair of UH-1B gunships orbit, early variants fitted with rocket pods and M60 machine guns, the first purpose-built helicopter gunships in American military history. 1 minute, Benson calls to the troops in his cabin. Lieutenant Marcus Reed stands in the door, one hand gripping the overhead, his M16 slung across his chest. He's 23 years old, Ranger qualified, and absolutely terrified in a way he wasn't during training. Training had chalk marks on the ground representing enemies. Training had referees with clipboards. Training didn't have real bullets. The jungle below erupts, muzzle flashes wink from the tree line like angry fireflies. Green tracers arc upward. NVA forces use green tracers while Americans use red, a color coding that makes night battles look like deadly fireworks displays. Benson hears the impacts before he consciously processes what's happening. Thunk, thunk, thunk as bullets punch through the Huey's aluminum skin. "Taking fire! Taking fire!" his co-pilot, Warrant Officer James Chen, shouts into the radio. "But they're committed. You can't abort an air assault once you've started the landing approach, not with 7 other helicopters following in tight formation, not with troops standing in the doors ready to jump." Benson keeps the nose down, keeps the approach angle steep because the only way out is through. The gunships roll in hot. Rockets streak from their pods with trails of white smoke impacting the tree line and fountains of earth and shredded vegetation. The door gunners open up with their M60s, the weapon's cyclic rate so fast it sounds like one continuous roar rather than individual shots. Reed's Huey hits the LZ hard. Benson flares at the last second, but there's no time for a gentle touchdown. The skids slam into the earth, and Reed is moving, jumping from the helicopter before it's fully settled. His boots hitting dirt as bullets snap through the air around him. "Move! Move! Move!" Sergeant First Class Deacon Williams is shouting, pushing men out of the cabin. The Huey can't stay on the ground more than seconds. Every second on the LZ is a second the enemy can concentrate fire on a stationary target. Reed hits the ground and runs, heading for the tree line on the opposite side from where the fire is coming from. Behind him, more Hueys are landing in sequence, 8 seconds apart, disgorging troops who scatter like ants. The air is filled with sound, rotor blades, gunfire, explosions, men shouting, the high-pitched whine of turbine engines at full power. Private Tommy Nguyen, no relation to any of the enemy forces, an American kid from California whose parents fled North Vietnam in '54, goes down 3 steps from the helicopter. Reed sees him fall, sees the red bloom spreading across his back, sees 2 other soldiers grab him and drag him toward cover. Benson pulls pitch, and his Huey leaps back into the air, nose down, accelerating away from the LZ with bullet holes stitched across the tail boom. His low fuel warning light is on, not from fuel consumption, but from fuel leaking through punctured tanks. He's got maybe 10 minutes before the engine quits. "Medevac, medevac," someone is screaming on the radio. "We've got 3 urgent surgical, 2 priority." And they've been on the ground for exactly 45 seconds. Reed makes it to the tree line and drops into a shallow depression that might have been a bomb crater from a previous engagement. Williams lands beside him, breathing hard, his M16 already up and firing controlled bursts into the jungle where the muzzle flashes are originating. "Where's Lieutenant Morrison's platoon?" Reed shouts. 300 meters west, Williams points. "We're supposed to link up and establish the perimeter." Supposed to. The operational plan called for a secure LZ within 5 minutes of landing. The operational plan assumed light resistance that would break contact once the gunships engaged. The operational plan didn't account for an enemy that wanted this fight, that had prepared this ambush, that understood the Americans would come in helicopters because helicopters were all the Americans knew how to use anymore. Another wave of Hueys comes in. Reed watches them descend into the maelstrom, watches the door gunners firing, watches the troops jumping into fire that's so intense you can see the bullets cutting through the elephant grass like an invisible scythe. One Huey takes a hit in the engine. Reed sees the smoke, sees the helicopter wobble, sees the pilot somehow keep it under control long enough to clear the LZ before making a hard landing 200 meters away in the jungle. Captain Robert Mason, the same pilot who evacuated Michael Cordero a year ago, is leading the second wave. He sees the downed Huey, sees the crew scrambling out, sees NVA forces moving through the jungle toward them. "Ghost Rider 2-3, I have a bird down at coordinates." Mason reads off the numbers. "Crew is mobile but taking fire. Somebody needs to get them out." "All aircraft. This is Dragon 6, actual." Colonel Moore's voice cuts through the radio traffic with the calm authority of a man who's been in combat before. "Continue landing operations. Gunships. Suppress fire from the western tree line. Medevac. Stand by for urgent surgical casualties." Mason brings his Huey in through fire so thick he can actually see the bullets. Not tracers, regular bullets, visible only because there are so many of them that probability alone means some are passing directly through his line of sight. A round punches through the windscreen between him and his co-pilot, missing both by inches, and continues through the cabin to exit through the floor. They land. Troops jump. Someone throws a smoke grenade, purple smoke, marking casualties for the medevac birds. Mason is pulling pitch when he feels the helicopter shudder. Something fundamental has broken. The collective feels wrong in his hand, the cyclic isn't responding properly, and the Huey is yawing to the right despite his pedal inputs. "We're hit!" Chen shouts. "Tail rotor's damaged!" Mason fights the controls. A helicopter without a working tail rotor is like a car without a steering wheel. The main rotor's torque will spin the aircraft in circles. He's got maybe seconds before this bird becomes a lawn dart. "Hold on," Mason shouts to his crew chief and door gunner. He sees a clearing, not the planned LZ, but some kind of natural opening in the jungle canopy about 400 meters east. It's small, it's rough. It might have trees or rocks or any number of things that will kill them on impact. But it's the only option that doesn't involve crashing into friendly troops. Mason commits. He uses what little tail rotor authority he has left, combines it with sideways thrust from the main rotor by banking the helicopter, performs a maneuver that isn't in any flight manual because flight manuals assume your aircraft has functioning controls. The Huey skids sideways through the air, losing altitude fast, the jungle rushing up to meet them. They hit hard. The right skid catches something, a log, a rock, doesn't matter, and the helicopter tips. The rotor blades strike the ground and disintegrate in an explosion of composite material and metal fragments. The cabin rolls once, twice, and comes to rest on its side. Mason hangs in his harness, blood running into his eyes from a cut on his forehead. His ears are ringing. His shoulder screams with pain, dislocated, maybe broken, but he's alive. Chen is moving beside him. Behind them, the crew chief is groaning. "Out!" Mason croaks. "Everybody out! Fuel leak!" They evacuate the wreckage, stumbling into the jungle as the Huey's shattered turbine ticks and cools behind them. Mason looks at his watch. They've been on the ground at landing zone X-ray for exactly 8 minutes. The battle will last 3 days. November 8th, 1964. Bien Hoa Air Base, South Vietnam. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Durant stands beside a UH-1B that looks nothing like the unarmed transport Hueys that started arriving 2 years ago. This bird bristles with weapons, twin M60 machine guns mounted in the doors, 2 rocket pods carrying 14 2.75-inch folding fin aerial rockets, and 2 M134 minigun pods, each capable of firing 4,000 rounds per minute. The Americans call these modified Hueys gunships. The Vietnamese, both north and south, call them Rong Lua, fire dragons. Durant is 24 years old and he's been flying combat missions for 7 months. His flight suit is stained with hydraulic fluid and sweat. His hands bear scars from hot brass casings ejected from door guns. His eyes have the 1,000-yard stare that comes from seeing too much, too fast, too young. "Sir," his crew chief, Sergeant Marcus Webb, calls from beneath the helicopter, "we've got a hydraulic leak on the starboard side. Maintenance says we're grounded until they can get parts." "How long?" 2 days, maybe 3. Durant nods, but his jaw tightens. 2 days means 2 days of other crews flying his missions, taking his risks, protecting troops who've come to depend on the distinctive sound of gunship rotors. The relationship between ground troops and helicopter crews has evolved into something almost spiritual. The grunts call them angels, call them saviors, paint nose art on the birds with names like Pale Horse and Reaper and Hell from Above. 3 miles away, in a tunnel complex that took 6 months to dig, Colonel Nguyen Van Than receives a report from his regimental commander. Another ambush failed. They'd positioned a company-sized force along a trail, had perfect firing positions, had watched an American patrol walk into the kill zone. Then the helicopters came. "How many?" Than asks. 2 gunships, sir. They were overhead within 3 minutes of the first shots. Our men couldn't maintain positions. The rockets, the machine guns. We lost 18 killed, 23 wounded. The Americans had 4 casualties, all evacuated within 10 minutes. Than studies the map on his table, a hand-drawn affair showing American positions, patrol routes, fire bases. What he's seeing troubles him deeply. 2 years ago, his forces could ambush American patrols with near impunity, hit fast, kill as many as possible, disappear into the jungle before reinforcements arrived. It was the same tactic that worked against the French, against the Japanese, against every foreign invader for 1,000 years. But the helicopters have changed the mathematics of ambush. Now every patrol has gunships on call. Every engagement brings immediate air support. Every wounded American is evacuated before shock can kill them. The Americans have figured out how to project power without roads, without preparation, without the logistical chains that insurgent forces traditionally interdict. "We need new tactics," Than says finally. order all units to implement the following. No ambushes in daylight unless cloud cover prevents helicopter operations. No more than 15 minutes of contact before withdrawing. Prepare spider holes and tunnel entrances near all ambush sites. When the helicopters come, our men go underground. His commander nods. The political officers are concerned. The men are calling the gunships Ma Gen, Black Death. Some units are refusing to engage when they hear helicopter rotors. Thon feels anger flash through him. Tell the political officers that fear is honest. Only fools aren't afraid of gunships. But fear is not defeat. The Americans have helicopters. We have tunnels. They have technology. We have patience. Every helicopter they lose is worth $20 million and a pilot who takes months to train. Every man we lose. He stops, the calculation too brutal to complete even in his own mind. At Firebase Thunder, Lieutenant Marcus Reed, now Captain Reed after a battlefield promotion, briefs his platoon on the day's operation. They're going on a search and destroy mission in the Iron Triangle, a Viet Cong stronghold that's proven impossible to clear using conventional tactics. We insert at 0600, Reed says, pointing to the map. 4 Hueys, 32 troops. Gunships will suppress the LZ during insertion. We sweep north through this sector, looking for tunnel entrances, supply caches, anything that indicates enemy presence. Extraction is here, at 1500 hours. Private James Martinez raises his hand. He's 19, been in country for 3 weeks, still has the wide-eyed look of someone who hasn't yet learned what fear really feels like. Sir, what if we make contact? Then the gunships come back, Reed says simply. And if it's heavy contact, more Hueys bring reinforcements. The days of being cut off and surrounded are over. As long as we can reach the radio, help is minutes away. What Reed doesn't say, what he doesn't need to say because everyone who's been here more than a month already knows, is that minutes away can feel like hours when you're taking fire. That radio antennas get shot off. That weather can ground helicopters. That the enemy has learned to shoot at the helicopters themselves, turning the rescuers into victims. The mission launches at dawn. Reed watches the sunrise from the open door of the lead Huey, the ground 3,000 feet below painted in shades of green and gold. The air at altitude is cool, almost comfortable, a brief respite from the crushing humidity that will return the moment they land. 2 minutes, the pilot calls back. Reed stands, checks his weapon, looks at the men in his Huey. They're doing their pre-combat rituals, checking magazines, adjusting gear, saying silent prayers or curses. Martinez is gripping his M16 so hard his knuckles are white. The gunships roll in first, rockets streaking from their pods, machine guns hammering. The LZ erupts in explosions and tracer fire. Reed's Huey descends into the chaos, the door gunners adding their M60s to the symphony of violence. They land. Reed jumps, boots hitting earth. The Huey lifts off behind him, making room for the next bird. He's running toward the tree line when he hears the distinctive crack of an AK-47 firing on full automatic. Martinez goes down. Just falls, no drama, no Hollywood death scene, just a kid who was standing and is now lying still in the elephant grass. "Corpsman!" Reed shouts, but Sergeant Williams is already there, already checking for a pulse, already reaching for his radio. "Medevac! Medevac! We have one urgent surgical!" Above them, Durant's replacement, Warrant Officer Sarah Chen, one of the first female combat pilots, banks her gunship toward the reported enemy position. She sees the muzzle flashes, sees the soldiers huddled around their casualty, sees the whole tactical situation laid out below her like a deadly chess game. "I've got the target," she tells her co-pilot. "Going hot." The minigun spins up with a sound like tearing silk amplified 1,000 times. 6,000 rounds per minute, 100 rounds per second, pour into the jungle where the fire originated. Trees disintegrate, vegetation shreds, the very earth seems to vibrate under the onslaught. The enemy fire stops. A medevac Huey is overhead in 4 minutes. Martinez is loaded and airborne in 6 minutes. He'll be in surgery in 15 minutes. He'll survive. The bullet missed his spine by 3 centimeters, missed his heart by 5. Reed watches the medevac bird disappear toward the horizon, then returns his attention to the mission. They're 2 hours into what's supposed to be a 9-hour operation. They've taken 1 casualty. The enemy has learned not to fight unless they can win quickly and withdraw before the helicopters arrive. The war's changing. The Huey is changing it. February 18, 1965. Kieu Chi District, South Vietnam. Sergeant Thomas Tunnel Rat Williamson lies on his belly at the entrance to a hole barely 2 feet wide, carved into the red earth beneath a termite mound. He's 5'6" and weighs 130 pounds, deliberately kept light because only small men can navigate the tunnels that honeycomb the ground beneath South Vietnam like a subterranean highway system. In his right hand, he holds a .45 caliber pistol and a flashlight. That's it. No rifle. Too long for tunnel fighting. No grenades. Too dangerous in confined spaces. No radio. Signals don't penetrate 20 feet of earth. If he gets into trouble down there, he's alone. "You sure about this?" Private First Class David Chen asks, holding the rope that's tied around Williamson's waist, the only connection between him and the surface world. "Never sure," Williamson replies, "but that's the job." He crawls into the darkness. The tunnel walls close around him like a tomb. The air is thick, humid, smelling of earth and something else. Cordite, maybe, or human occupation. Williamson inches forward on his elbows, the flashlight beam cutting through blackness that seems to swallow light. His heart pounds so hard he's sure anyone ahead can hear it. 20 feet in, the tunnel branches. Left or right? Williamson chooses left because right slopes downward, and downward means deeper, means harder to escape if things go wrong. The tunnel narrows. His shoulders scrape both walls. Claustrophobia claws at his brainstem, the primal terror of being buried alive, of being trapped in a space where you can't even turn around. Something moves ahead. Williamson freezes, kills the flashlight, lies in absolute darkness, listening. Breathing. Someone is breathing ahead of him, not American breathing. Different rhythm, different cadence, the breathing of someone who knows these tunnels, who lives in them, who's waiting with an AK-47 or a knife or a bamboo spike trap. Above ground, Captain Reed watches a Huey gunship make another pass over the village they're searching. The Americans have learned that the Viet Cong don't just hide in the jungle. They hide beneath villages, beneath rice paddies, beneath the very ground the Americans walk on. Cu Chi District alone has over 200 miles of tunnels, some 3 levels deep, complete with hospitals, command centers, weapons caches, and living quarters for entire battalions. "Anything?" Reed asks Corporal Martinez, recovered from his wound, back on duty with a scar that runs from his shoulder blade to his spine. "Found 6 tunnel entrances so far," Martinez reports. "Engineers are sealing them with explosives. Williamson went down the 7th entrance 15 minutes ago." Reed looks at his watch. 15 minutes, underground. The protocol says if a tunnel rat doesn't emerge within 30 minutes, you assume he's dead and seal the entrance. "Get ready to pull him out," Reed orders. Below, Williamson makes his decision. He switches the flashlight back on, shines it directly ahead, and fires 3 shots down the tunnel in rapid succession. The .45 roars like artillery in the confined space, the muzzle flash blinding, the sound so loud it makes his ears ring even through the damage they've already sustained. Silence. Then, movement. Scrabbling sounds. Someone crawling away fast, heading deeper into the tunnel system. Williamson doesn't pursue. Only idiots chase armed enemies through tunnels where the enemy knows every turn, every trap, every dead end. He backs out, pulling himself with his elbows, the rope around his waist, his lifeline to sanity. It takes 10 minutes to reach the entrance. Hands grab him, pull him into daylight that makes him squint after the darkness. He's covered in red clay, breathing hard, his hands shaking from adrenaline crash. "Someone's down there," he gasps. "Active tunnel, recent use." Reed nods to the engineers. "Seal it. CS gas first, then explosives." They pump tear gas into the tunnel entrance, then drop in satchel charges and blow the opening. The ground shakes. Somewhere underground, tunnel sections collapse, creating a tomb for anyone who didn't evacuate fast enough. But Reed knows the truth. For every tunnel they find and seal, 3 more remain hidden. The Viet Cong have spent years building this underground infrastructure specifically to counter American air power. You can't bomb what you can't see. You can't strafe what's 20 feet underground. The Hueys, for all their speed and firepower, are useless against an enemy that disappears into the earth like water into sand. 5 miles away, in a tunnel complex that hasn't been discovered yet, Colonel Nguyen Van Than watches a medic treat a soldier's shattered eardrum, the result of Williamson's .45 rounds fired in the confined space. The soldier will live, but his hearing is destroyed. "The Americans are learning," Than's second-in-command observes. They're using small men to enter the tunnels now. They're using gas, explosives, trained dogs to sniff out entrances. Than nods slowly. And we adapt again. We build deeper. We build water traps that block gas. We build false tunnels with booby traps. The Americans have helicopters. We have time and patience. They want to fight this war in the air. We'll fight it underground. What neither Than nor Reed fully understands yet is that the war is split into two parallel conflicts happening in different dimensions. Above ground, American helicopters dominate, moving troops and supplies with impunity during daylight hours. Below ground, the Viet Cong build and hide and plan, emerging only at night or when weather grounds the helicopters. At Bien Hoa Air Base, Warrant Officer Durant stands beside his repaired gunship and watches the steady stream of helicopters taking off and landing, an aerial ballet that never stops. Hueys are everywhere now. The Army has over 400 in-country, with more arriving every week. They've become the signature weapon of the Vietnam War, as iconic as the M1 Garand was in World War II or the Sherman tank. "Sir," Sergeant Webb says, approaching with a clipboard, "maintenance is reporting we're burning through rotor blades faster than expected. The humidity, the heat, the constant operations. Birds are flying twice as many hours as the manual says they should." "So, we fly them until they break," Durant replies. "What's the alternative? Tell the troops on the ground they can't have air support because we're worried about maintenance schedules?" Webb doesn't argue. Everyone knows the answer. The operational tempo is unsustainable by peacetime standards, but peacetime standards don't apply when men are dying in rice paddies and jungle clearings, when the only difference between survival and death is whether a helicopter can reach you in time. Durant's radio crackles. All gunships. We have troops in contact at grid." The coordinates follow, somewhere in the Central Highlands, 30 miles away. Durant is running toward his helicopter before the transmission ends. Webb is right behind him, along with the crew chief and door gunner. They're airborne in 90 seconds, rotors already spinning when they climbed aboard, Durant pulling pitch before his harness is even fastened. The flight takes 14 minutes at maximum speed. Durant can see the battle before he arrives, smoke rising from the jungle, the flash of explosions, tiny figures that might be men scattered across a hillside. His radio is chaos, multiple voices talking over each other, someone screaming for medevac, someone else calling out enemy positions. "Ghost Rider 2-1. This is Dragon Actual on the ground." Captain Reed's voice cuts through the noise with practiced calm. "We are pinned down on the south slope of Hill 271. Enemy force estimated at company strength, fortified positions with machine guns. We have 8 casualties, 3 urgent surgical, cannot evacuate on foot, too hot. Need gun runs on the enemy positions and medevac extraction from our current location." Durant switches to his weapons frequency. "Copy Dragon Actual. Beginning gun run now. Mark your position with smoke." Purple smoke billows from Reed's location. Durant banks the gunship, lines up on the enemy positions 200 meters upslope from the smoke, and fires. Rockets streak away, trailing white contrails. The miniguns roar. The door gunners add M60 fire. The hillside erupts in a continuous explosion of vegetation and earth. Durant makes 3 passes, each one bringing him closer to the ground, closer to the enemy fire that's now trying to shoot him down instead of shooting at Reed's platoon. A medevac Huey comes in low, flaring hard to hover over Reed's position because there's nowhere to land on the steep slope. Wounded men are loaded while Reed's troops provide covering fire, and Durant's gunship makes another pass overhead, suppressing any enemy who might want to interfere with the evacuation. The medevac departs with all 8 casualties. Reed's platoon begins bounding back down the hill, moving by fire teams, one group covering while another moves. The enemy pursues, sensing victory, thinking they can overrun the Americans before more helicopters arrive. They're wrong. 2 more gunships arrive, then a flight of 4 slicks carrying reinforcements. Within 20 minutes, what was an American retreat becomes an enemy massacre. The NVA forces withdraw into their tunnels, disappearing underground like ghosts, leaving their dead behind because recovering bodies would mean exposing themselves to helicopter fire. Durant flies back to base, his minigun barrels glowing red from heat, his ammunition nearly exhausted. He lands, shuts down, and sits in the cockpit for a long moment before climbing out. 17 missions today, Webb says, checking the log. 6 gun runs, 4 medevac escorts, 7 troop insertions. We've been airborne for 9 hours. Durant nods. 9 hours. The Huey was designed for maybe 4 hours of flight per day with extensive maintenance between missions. But design specifications mean nothing when the alternative is leaving men to die. He walks toward the operations tent to check the next day's schedule. The war continues, the helicopters fly, and somewhere underground, the enemy digs deeper. April 30th, 1975, rooftop of 22, Geelong Street, Saigon. The war's ending the way it began, with helicopters. Chief Warrant Officer 5 Thomas Durant, now 41 years old with gray threading through his hair, brings his Huey into a hover above a Saigon rooftop jammed with desperate Vietnamese civilians. He's flown combat missions for 13 years across 4 tours, survived being shot down 6 times, watched the war grow and metastasize, and finally collapse. And now he's here for the final chapter, Operation Frequent Wind, the largest helicopter evacuation in history. 30 seconds, his crew chief shouts over the rotor noise, trying to count the people packed onto the roof. 40? 50? More climbing up the building's fire escape every minute, all of them hoping for one of the helicopters that circle Saigon like steel vultures, picking up anyone they can before the North Vietnamese army completes its conquest. Durant holds the hover, his rotor blades clearing the rooftop by maybe 10 feet, while the crew chief and door gunner pull people aboard. Old men, women with children. ARVN soldiers still in uniform throwing away their weapons to make room for one more civilian. Everyone knows what comes next: retribution, re-education camps, a reckoning for everyone who sided with the Americans. "That's 15, the crew chief calls. "We're overweight." "Keep loading," Durant shouts back. "Sir, we're 700 pounds over max gross weight. We might not be able to—" "Keep loading!" They pull 23 people into a helicopter designed for 8. Durant can feel the Huey struggling, the engine straining, the rotor blades biting air that feels too thin to support this much weight. When he pulls collective to climb away from the roof, the helicopter shudders, drops a few feet, then claws its way upward with the protesting scream of an engine being pushed past every safety limit. They head for the USS Midway, waiting offshore with its deck crammed with helicopters that have already landed, that will probably be pushed overboard to make room for more because there isn't time for anything except getting people out, saving who can be saved, abandoning everything else. Durant looks down at Saigon, the city he's flown over for 13 years, protected and resupplied and watched grow from a colonial holdover into a sprawling metropolis supported by American money and American blood and American helicopters. Smoke rises from a dozen fires. Traffic clogs every street as people flee south toward the sea. North Vietnamese tanks are reportedly 10 miles outside the city, moving fast, meeting no resistance from an army of the Republic of Vietnam that ceased to exist as a fighting force. This is what we came for? Durant thinks but doesn't say. To leave like this? He lands on the Midway, drops his passengers, who kiss the deck, weep, thank him in Vietnamese and broken English, and immediately takes off again because there are more rooftops, more desperate people, more missions to fly before Saigon falls completely. In Washington, D.C., in the Pentagon's Army Aviation Briefing Room, a colonel stands before a wall covered with statistics that tell the story of American helicopter operations in Vietnam. The numbers are staggering. 125,000 sorties flown, 21,000 tons of cargo transported, 900,000 casualties evacuated, of which 210,000 were enemy personnel, 11,146 helicopters destroyed or damaged beyond repair, 5,086 pilots and crew killed in action. The UH-1 Iroquois, the colonel says to an audience of military historians and DoD analysts, fundamentally changed modern warfare. It proved that air mobility could work at scale, that troops could be inserted and extracted from any location, that the traditional constraints of terrain and distance could be overcome through helicopter operations. He clicks to the next slide, a graph showing helicopter production over the 13-year war. Bell produced 16,000 Hueys between 1960 and 1975. At peak operations in 1968, we had over 4,000 helicopters in country. The entire American tactical doctrine evolved to assume helicopter support for every operation. Another slide, this one showing enemy adaptations. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong learned to counter our air mobility. They developed extensive tunnel systems to avoid helicopter surveillance. They concentrated anti-aircraft weapons around likely landing zones. They shifted to night operations when helicopters were less effective. They attacked our fuel and ammunition depots, knowing that helicopters are logistics intensive. A final slide. Footage from Khe Sanh, showing a Huey exploding midair after taking a direct hit. Air mobility gave us tactical advantages, but not strategic victory. We could go anywhere, but we couldn't hold everywhere. We could evacuate wounded in minutes, but we couldn't prevent them from being wounded in the first place. The Huey made us more mobile, more lethal, more capable, and none of it was enough. He pauses, looking at the image of the burning helicopter. The question for future conflicts is whether air mobility doctrine survives this failure, or whether we've just proven that helicopters in combat are an expensive way to take casualties. Back in Vietnam, soon to be just Vietnam, no more north and south, no more dividing line at the 17th parallel, General Nguyen Van Thanh stands in what was, until this morning, the presidential palace in Saigon. He's 57 years old now, scarred from decades of warfare, victor in a war he's not sure anyone actually won. His aide brings a report. The last American helicopter departed Saigon at 0753 hours. Operation Frequent Wind is complete. The Americans are gone. Don walks to the window and looks out at the city. 13 years of war. 3 million dead on all sides. A country devastated, poisoned with Agent Orange, cratered by bombs, littered with unexploded ordnance that will kill farmers for generations. And for what? To prove that determination could defeat technology? To prove that helicopters, for all their capabilities, couldn't win a war against people willing to pay any price for independence? The helicopters, Thon says quietly. We laughed at them at first. Do you remember? His aide, younger, too young to remember 1962, shakes his head. They were slow, vulnerable. We thought they were toys, American extravagance. Then they became death incarnate. The sound of rotor blades became the sound of doom. We built our entire strategy around avoiding them, hiding from them, negating their advantages. We won the war, but the helicopters nearly won it for them. But we prevailed, General. We survived, Thon corrects. There's a difference. Aboard the USS Midway, Durant shuts down his Huey for the last time in Vietnamese airspace. His flight suit is soaked with sweat. His hands, still shaking after all these years, grip the collective and cyclic with white-knuckled intensity he can't release even after the engine quits. That's it, sir, his crew chief says softly. War's over. We're done. Durant sits in silence, listening to the turbine wind down, watching through the windscreen as sailors push another Huey over the side of the carrier to make room for more incoming evacuees. The helicopter tumbles through space, rotor blades folding like broken wings, and hits the water in an explosion of foam. It floats for maybe 10 seconds before sinking, carrying with it millions of dollars of technology and years of combat experience and the hopes of everyone who thought air mobility would make the difference. 13 years, Durant says finally. 13 years of flying these things into places no sane person would go, and we lost anyway. We saved a lot of people, the crew chief offers. Yeah. Durant climbs out of the cockpit, his legs stiff, his back aching from too many hard landings and too many hours at the controls. Yeah, we did. He walks across the deck, past rows of Hueys that will probably be pushed overboard too because there's no room for them, no need for them, no war left to fight. Behind him, another helicopter lands, disgorges 20 more refugees, adds another mission to the tally that will eventually reach 1,173 American personnel and 5,595 Vietnamese evacuated in 19 hours of continuous operations. The largest helicopter operation in history. The final proof that the Huey could do anything asked of it except win a war. Captain David Reed, now Lieutenant Colonel Reed, survivor of 4 tours and more combat than any human should endure, stands on the deck watching the evacuations continue. He's thinking about Sergeant Martinez dead in a rice paddy in 1966, about Private Cordero, saved by a medevac bird in 1963 only to die in a helicopter crash in 1967, about the thousands of men he watched climb aboard Hueys over the years, some coming back, some not, all of them trusting that the sound of rotor blades meant salvation. Sir, a young Marine approaches, second lieutenant, fresh-faced, maybe 23 years old. They're saying the North Vietnamese dismissed the Hueys at first, laughed at them. Is that true? Reed thinks about that morning in 1962 when Colonel Thon watched a Huey fly overhead and made jokes about shooting ducks. Thinks about how quickly the jokes stopped. Thinks about how the enemy learned to fear the sound of incoming helicopters, learned to respect the firepower they carried, learned eventually to counter them through adaptation and determination. Yeah, Reed says. They laughed at first. Then the Huey became their worst nightmare. Then they figured out how to survive it. Then they won anyway. So the helicopters didn't matter? They mattered, Reed says quietly, watching another Huey settle onto the deck. They saved tens of thousands of lives. They changed how wars are fought. They proved that air mobility works. But mattering isn't the same as winning. The Hueys did everything we asked them to do. Everything except make this war winnable. The evacuations continue through the night, helicopter after helicopter landing and taking off, ferrying the last Americans and their allies out of a country that's been at war for 30 years and will finally have peace. The peace of conquest, of submission, of victory for one side and defeat for the other. The sun rises on May 1st, 1975, and the war is over. The last Huey has flown its last mission from Vietnamese soil. The sound of rotor blades, that distinctive whop, whop, whop that defined a generation's experience of war, fades into memory. Durant will return to the United States and never fly again, the shaking in his hands finally acknowledged as the PTSD it always was. Reed will spend 3 decades teaching military history, trying to explain to new generations how the most technologically advanced military in history lost to an enemy that fought with determination and patience. Nguyen Van Than will live to see a unified Vietnam rebuild, will watch American tourists visit the country his generation bled to liberate, will wonder sometimes if the victory was worth the cost. And the Hueys, the 16,000 helicopters that changed warfare forever, will scatter across the world. Some will serve in other armies, other wars, other conflicts where their combination of speed and cargo capacity remains unmatched. Some will end up in museums, static displays commemorating a war that America chose to forget. Some will fly tourists over Hawaii or fight forest fires in California or patrol borders in Africa. But none will forget what they proved in Vietnam. That technology alone cannot win wars. That mobility without purpose is just movement. That the sound of rotor blades can bring salvation or death depending on which side you're standing on. That sometimes the weapons that change everything still aren't enough. The Huey arrived in Vietnam to laughter in 1962. It departed to silence in 1975. In between, it became legend, the workhorse, the lifesaver, the angel of mercy, the fire dragon, the worst nightmare of an enemy that learned to respect it, counter it, and ultimately outlast it. 36,000, 125,000 sorties, 5,086 crew killed, millions of lives touched, saved, transported, protected, or destroyed. The Vietnam War's most iconic weapon, the helicopter that changed everything, the machine that proved you can dominate the sky and still lose the ground.